So when I said I had a few more Star Trek builds I wanted to share with you, it might have been more than a few. Hi, I'm Joe, and here we have all of the builds from the BlueBrixx Star Trek Advent Calendar. Now, if any of these look familiar, there's a good chance that I've used one or two of them in some of my previous videos. Plus, I've already made a short about each of these models, but this will be the first full video that I've made dedicated to the full Advent Calendar that BlueBrixx released in 2023. And I know I and several other people have said in the past that BlueBrixx, even though they have lost the Star Trek license by now, they really did love Star Trek there. And one of the things that I think proves it is this Advent Calendar, because if you count up all of the models, there are actually 27 here. Of course, a traditional Advent Calendar would have 24 windows with one build per window. But I got the sense that BlueBrixx came up with all of these micro-scale models and couldn't stand the thought of taking 3 of them out. So some of the windows actually had multiple models in a single day. And of course, I was thrilled to get this Advent Calendar. There are over 800 pieces total across these 27 models, and almost every model has its own display stand. So it's reasonable to keep these built year-round, and I've had these here on the shelf next to my desk ever since I've had them all built. So let's take a quick look at each model. Now, I'm not going to go into extensive detail about each of the 27 models, and I am going to break this show and tell down into groups. And I'm going to start off with this group that I'm calling the main ships of the main Star Trek shows. And before I get too much farther, the only era of Star Trek that BlueBrixx sets cover is from the original series up through Star Trek Enterprise, so 1966 through 2005. And that also includes all the movies in that time period. And we start here with the original series Enterprise, which has these cylindrical nacelles. It has this kind of bronze-colored piece that's supposed to symbolize the deflector dish, which looks more like a physical dish and not some type of blue disc. And just this kind of mushroom top piece to serve as the saucer section. And I should point out the stands that come with each of these models are color-coded. And any Federation ship has a round gold 2x2 jumper plate. Next, we have the USS Enterprise A, or really just the movie version of the Enterprise, because the Enterprise was the same in all the movies, even when it was rebuilt as the A after it was destroyed in Star Trek III. And here we've got the flatter nacelles with the blue translucent plates on the inside to give it its color. Has the same type of saucer section, and its deflector dish is a hollow 1x1 trans blue plate. Next, I have the Enterprise D, which was the main ship of Star Trek The Next Generation, and it has the wider saucer section here, 6 studs wide instead of 4, and it has the flatter nacelles that are flat on top with the red translucent tiles on top to give it its color. Its deflector dish is represented by this 2x2 plate in trans blue, and the side of that plate is what gives the deflector dish its color. Next is not really a ship, but it is the focal point of the TV show Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It's the station itself, and is one of the most impressive Advent Calendar builds I've ever done. It has the 3 main pylons. It has the habitat ring here, represented by this wheel piece, and ops would be this 1x1 piece here at the top. And it even has the power generator portion of the station represented in trans red. Notice its tile is black because technically this is not a Federation space station, it's a Bajoran space station. And here we have the USS Defiant, which was the main ship of Deep Space Nine from at least the 3rd season on. And this is another impressive build at this scale because it managed to get the angles pretty well done for just a few plates and tiles. The red plates symbolize the sides of the nacelles, which are tight into the body of the ship and not extended out like most starships. And the sides of translucent blue plates give color to the back of the ship. Next, we have the USS Voyager, of course, the main ship from Star Trek Voyager, which has more of the arrowhead saucer section and not much of a secondary hull. It has the red stripe down the side for color. It has these little, what BlueBrixx calls melty beads pieces on the ends of these pistol pieces to give the nacelles color. Unfortunately, the nacelles are stuck in the flat position on this Voyager model, where normally on the show they'd be able to fold up slightly when it goes into warp. Its deflector dish is represented by the side of this trans blue 1x1 plate. Next we have the Enterprise E, which for me was kind of difficult to recognize because the Enterprise E only appeared in 3 movies: Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and Star Trek Nemesis. And the Enterprise E, unlike the D, has a longer, narrower saucer section, which is something that I didn't actually remember because we just don't see the outside of the ship very much in those movies. It has nacelles that were larger in the front and skinny at the back, so that's why we've got the red cone pieces here for the front of the nacelles, and we use more of these translucent blue melty bead pieces for the back. And its deflector dish is represented using the side of a trans yellow 1x1 plate. And finally, we have the Enterprise, NX-01, which of course was the main ship from the show Star Trek Enterprise, or as it was first released, just Enterprise. This is the only model of the Advent calendar that's done in pearl gray, to give this model a better representation of the less refined USS Enterprise, which had only a saucer section and nacelles. It had no secondary hull. And there's nothing on this little build to represent the deflector dish, which was actually on the show built into the front of the saucer section. This next group is other Federation ships that were important enough to have models in the Advent calendar, but were not the leading ships of any show or movie. We'll start here. This is the Federation ship USS Reliant, which was featured in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and even though it's a Federation ship and marked as such with the gold piece at the bottom here, was used by Khan in the movie more than it was used by the Federation. So when I was 10 years old first watching the movie, I always thought of this as an enemy ship, but it was a Federation ship, and it has similar nacelles to the Enterprise A with the trans blue tile inside of the nacelles. They're just hanging under the ship instead of above it, and a trans light blue tile up at the top to represent, I think, the deflector dish of the Reliant, which actually was positioned above the saucer. And you see the impulse engines, I believe, represented by the trans red plate that goes underneath the other plates that are part of the model. Next, we have the USS Excelsior, which this is another model that took me a bit to figure out what it was because I didn't recognize this 1x3 sand blue tiles representing anything, but my video about the Excelsior already went into this, and it's because the Excelsior was introduced in the movie Star Trek III, was briefly glimpsed in Star Trek IV, and was more heavily featured in Star Trek VI, but you don't really get that many good views of the top of the ship. And sure enough, the Excelsior has this longer extension from the saucer connecting it to the secondary hull. It also has really long nacelles, which are just represented by rods on this model. And actually the deflector dish is not represented at all. Here we have a Federation shuttlecraft, and I believe this is from Star Trek The Next Generation. I am not an expert on shuttlecraft models, because I know that shuttlecraft can range from small two-person crafts to something a little bit bigger where it actually has like space to sit in the back, to something more like a runabout, which actually functions almost like a flying apartment. But this, I believe, is a Federation shuttlecraft, and it's the only model in the Advent calendar that's white. Here we have the USS Stargazer, which was only featured in one episode, The Battle, from Season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation, and its distinguishing feature is the 4 nacelles, in this case just represented by 4 rods, but this was the ship that was the first ship that Captain Picard had command of. And here we have from Star Trek Voyager the Delta Flyer, which was a specially built shuttlecraft designed by Tom Paris, lover of hot rods. And supposedly it was built to specifically handle the challenges of traveling in the Delta Quadrant. One of the running jokes of Voyager is how many shuttles were destroyed ever since they got to the Delta Quadrant, making people wonder how many shuttles did they actually have aboard Voyager. Well, at the beginning of Season 5, there's an episode, and I forget the name, but the Voyager needs to reclaim some of its technology that's trapped in a hostile atmosphere. And in order to beat an alien species to recovering that technology, they have to build a special shuttle, and that's what caused the Delta Flyer to get created. This is a very bulky model for an advent calendar build, especially for something that's essentially a shuttlecraft. But it has some color with the red brick in the middle, kind of providing just a stripe, and I guess these trans blue grill pieces kind of represent the nacelles, because the Delta Flyer was warp capable. And finally, we have here an Akira-class starship, which is something that has not appeared on screen as much as it has appeared in video games and extended media. But this is said to be the USS Thunderchild, which I think was the favorite model of one of the BlueBrixx model designers. That's just a guess on my part, because there's actually a larger size model of that same ship. But these ships were most notably seen on screen only for maybe brief glimpses during the battle against the Borg cube in the movie Star Trek First Contact. It has a translucent red tile and blue grill piece to give its nacelles its color. In this next group, we'll look at the alien ships, starting here with the Romulan bird of prey, which was the first Romulan ship shown in Star Trek the original series, the episode Balance of Terror. And its distinguishing features were the round front tapering towards the back. On the show, it showed a bird painted underneath. Of course, that can't really be represented at this scale. And its two nacelles were out to the side and angled up above the saucer. In this case, the stand has a dark gray tile to indicate that this is a Romulan ship. Next, we have the Klingon bird of prey, which is a completely different ship from the Romulan bird of prey. This one was introduced in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. And this ship would go on to be featured in Star Trek 4, 5, 6, 7, lots of episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I don't remember for sure if one ever showed up in Star Trek Voyager or in Star Trek Enterprise. So this is one of the best known Klingon ships. It is also the only Klingon ship in this advent calendar, so it's the only one that has the red jumper plate on the stand, which is kind of disappointed because I think the D7 battlecruiser would have also made a good addition to this collection. Next, we have a Ferengi ship. The Ferengi were seen as a military adversary at the beginning of Star Trek The Next Generation, especially Season 1 and 2, but they were very difficult to take seriously, and eventually the Ferengi just became another species in the galaxy that was neither a friend nor an enemy. But Ferengi ships were seen more often in the early seasons of Next Generation, and they had this kind of reddish-brown color to them. The backs of the ships on the show had more of a grill pattern that made it look like there were lights coming out of the engines, but the shape of this small-scale model is reasonably accurate, and it has this bright green jumper plate to indicate that it's Ferengi. Next, we have the Romulan Warbird, which was introduced in the very last episode of Season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation, The Neutral Zone. And this is a very interesting model to me because I'd always wondered how would you do a Romulan Warbird in bricks, especially with that hollow inside. And I think at this scale, this model captures that shape pretty well. The model was kind of difficult to build because as you're pressing the pieces down in the middle, the inside wants to collapse. So what I did when I was building is I would put another longer tile inside just as a spacer, and then I'd get everything pressed down to where it was attached and then just pull the tile out, and there we've got our gap. Next, we have a Borg cube, and this is a model I've actually looked at closer when I did my video about Borg cubes. The Borg, of course, were introduced in Season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation, and were, of course, the main antagonist of what's probably the most famous Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Best of Both Worlds. And here it's just a cube with lots of these translucent lime green pieces to represent, I guess, the lights from inside the cube. Then finally, we have a Galore-class Cardassian warship. Cardassians were introduced in Season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation and became one of the primary antagonists of Deep Space Nine a couple of years later. We kind of only see enough of their ships to know, yeah, that's a Cardassian ship. And its shape, to me, like I said when I reviewed it with the Deep Space Nine sets, reminds me of a tadpole. But this is a pretty reasonable advent calendar size representation of the ship. And we've kind of got this pearl copper here that is an interesting color to use to at least keep this model from just being monochrome. And this last group of builds are all objects that are not ships or space stations, starting with the original series phaser, which is pretty well represented here with the flat silver or pearl gray, whatever you want to call it, at the tip for where the phaser emitter is. And some of the phasers on the original series looked like they had hand phasers attached at the top of the more pistol variety, and that's just represented with black bricks here. We have the original series tricorder, complete with printed pieces and a strap for the science officer to carry this on their shoulder. And we have the original series communicator, at least in the open position. Even though this is on a clip and bar, I don't think it closes. Nope. But it does have printed pieces for the speaker and whatever the control panel is. Then we have a few objects from Star Trek The Next Generation. This is a Next Generation era tricorder, again with printed pieces. And again, it does not fold up all the way. This is just on a stand to show what it looks like when it's in use. Then we have a data pad. This is my least favorite of the Advent Calendar builds. When you've got 26 good ones, I guess it's forgivable for the 27th to not be as good. It does have a nice printed tile, but that's all it is a printed tile. Then you have the Next Generation era phaser, which is what they called the Dustbuster, which looked like what a Dustbuster in the 80s looked like, except this one was a phaser. It has a printed tile on top as well. Then you have the jewel of the build, which is this micro diorama of the bridge of the original series USS Enterprise, where you've got the view screen here, you've got the navigator and helmsman station, that's a printed brick. The rails around the bridge are represented by those robot arms in red. You've got the captain's chair. That's just a black slope piece, but it represents the chair. If we go around, you've got all the various screens and stations represented by red pieces and printed tiles. This red printed tile is supposed to be the turbo lift door. You've got more workstations all the way around. Again, that's actually just the same printed tile all the way around. And then the view screen is also a printed tile, and that is actually from a specific episode called the Tholian Web, where the Enterprise gets trapped in an odd region of space, and the Tholians decide to trap the Enterprise by spinning this web, or creating this web of energy filaments. And I think it's cool that BlueBrixx actually put a printed tile together to reference a specific episode. Thank you for stopping by to check out all 27 of these Advent Calendar models. I promise we are getting just that much closer to the end of this Star Trek brick building journey. But until then, remember, today is a good day to build.